Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Greatly appreciate your participation in these readings. And as always, I'm going to remind you at the start of this one to please comment. Let me know not just your thoughts, but more to help the Sangha here and direct my study with you. If you have suggestions for certain aspects of Buddhism that you're curious about, or you haven't found a video anywhere in the playlist that satisfactorily addresses an issue or something you need clarification on, the comments section is essential for that. So, let me know. I've been committed this year and last year to read all of Nichiren's Goso, all of the writings that are still extant and in translation available of Nichiren's doctrine and teachings. There's a lot. And so it may seem like this has become the Nichiren channel. Certainly, this is the foundation of our Sangha's Buddhism. The Lotus Sutra, more accurately, is what we're studying. And Nichiren has the most extensive library of extant writings that we have as guidance for our practice of Lotus Sutra Buddhism, Myoho Renge Kyo Buddhism. But I'm very much dedicated to the scholarship of Buddhism in its entirety, as Nichiren was and as previous bodhisattvas were. And so I'm a strong proponent, speak clearly, of studying broadly, because I think that armed with that depth of understanding, the Lotus Sutra makes a hell of a lot more sense. It's easier, I shouldn't say sense, it's easier to penetrate the depths of the wisdom that is in the Lotus Sutra, because the Lotus Sutra is the final sermon, other than what he spoke on his deathbed, being the Nirvana Sutra. There's a Nirvana Sutra, though, if you read it, strongly endorses the Lotus Sutra. So the Lotus is the ultimate, the goal of Shakyamuni's teachings, the founder of Buddhism, right? But certainly, without studying any of the other prior sutras, a lot of concepts in the Lotus are, I don't want to say, so I won't say it. Correct myself on the fly there. As you know, none of this is scripted, so you're seeing me in the raw. Well, my thoughts in the raw. There's a lot of concepts in the Lotus Sutra that are assumed knowledge. That's the way I'll say it. And so even if you just study the perfection of wisdom, and I don't mean to make that trivial, it's quite a profound sutra and a study. Nagarjuna was a tremendous bodhisattva, very meticulous about proper understanding of Buddhist concepts. So I rely on a lot of his treatises for clarity on certain conceptual aspects of Buddhism. Vasubandhu is another, but my point being is that if you read the Lankavatara Mahayana teaching and the perfection of wisdom, and even the Surangama Sutra, which is a very early teaching, considered Hinayana Buddhism, pre-Mahayana. Some say early Mahayana, but anyway. In other words, you would have a spectrum of the stages, the periods of Shakyamuni's teachings. Certain things then, when you read or investigate the Lotus Sutra, will suddenly glare out at you. Oh yeah, I understand the breadth of information that this small statement here is built on. And that's incredibly eye-opening. to your practice, because then your understanding of what the characters of Myo and Ho and Ren and Ge and Kyo, what they're distilling. It's like adding the proper ingredients to a recipe, right? Until you figure out to add sour cream to your cheesecake recipe, it's just not really cheesecake, right? So, anyway, strange analogy, but you're welcome. Okay, new Gosho. The great benefits of the Lotus Sutra. Nichiren starts. I have received the 5,000 blue duck coins you sent. The first of the 5 precepts is not to take life, and the first of the 6 paramitas is that of almsgiving. The 10 good precepts, the 250 precepts, the 10 major precepts, and all the other rules of conduct begin with the prohibition against the taking of a life. Now again, you hear all these numbers, 5 precepts, 250 precepts, paramitas. Those will all be unmystified when you read earlier sutras, and this is what Nichiren is just tossing this out as assumed knowledge. So I encourage you, we all have different ways of study, right? I know for myself, I jump around, and early on, what I would do is read something like this, a Gosho like this, and I don't know, sometimes I would never finish the Gosho, because every time I came up against one of these assumed knowledges, I'd stop the middle of the sentence and go, 5 precepts. Okay, what's the 5 precepts? And I'd go on a search. I'd search through Buddhist sites, I'd search through Wikipedia, I'd search through Google, and I'd find out everything different people would say. And after a while, I became very aware that people would discuss these concepts based on their own personal stewardship, learning curve, their basis of study. For instance, if I would read something about the 5 precepts that was, I don't want to force my opinion on this. So, if it seemed to diverge a bit or have a lot of other things attached to it, I would be curious. Well, from whose perspective was this written? And then I would find out, oh, this is a Theravada Buddhist. So that would add a very strong coloration on that opinion. And so then I would read many other opinions on the 5 precepts, and there would be a lot of things that would track, but as I read from a Mahayana Buddhist or a professor of Buddhism or an independent Nichiren Buddhist, for instance, and maybe a Buddhist sect, I could see the colorations, and the constant thread would become very apparent, and the extraneous stuff would become very apparent. And that alone gave me a far greater understanding of the periods of Buddha's teachings from all these different perspectives. There was the thread that was consistent, and then there were several threads that, whether they did so consciously or not, were skewed for a particular application, a particular viewpoint. And that's very helpful as you study Buddhism, because all of it, I believe, puts you squarely at the driver's seat of the Dharma. And you do end up at the Lotus Sutra, no matter what other concept, what level of teaching that you study. Your clarity will come from studying many. And this Shakyamuni said this himself. Study Buddhism broadly. Don't get stuck on one thing, because all of it will bring you to your realizations, your insights, and that's all that Buddhism is about you awakening your Buddha nature. What path you need to take to do that, only you know. And actually, you don't know it until you study. That's when the insight comes. That's when the, aha, I get this. Your path is making itself known as you study. I can't overstate how important study is to your Buddhist practice. Moving on. Every being, from the highest sage on down to the smallest mosquito or gnat, holds life to be its most precious possession. Fundamental Buddhism, right? To deprive a being of life is to commit the gravest kind of sin. Not because you ended a life so much as you ended the possibility of awakening. So yes, you've killed a human being or a gnat or whatever, but you've killed their potential for Buddhahood. That is massive. That's why the translation says sin. It's not a very Buddhist term, but as it translates, you understand with my description just now why it's such a grave offense. When the Thus Come One appeared in this world, he made compassion for living things his basis. And as an expression of compassion for life, to refrain from taking life and to provide sustenance for living beings are the most important precepts. So that sustenance is offerings, any kind of alms, right? Any kinds of support, like your donations, whether they're financial or they're, as I've said before, not, I guess, perishables in the sense, that's an odd word to use in this context, but things like incense, candles, in those days, a rice or a robe, those kind of things, right? All right. In providing another with sustenance, one obtains three kinds of benefit. First, one sustains one's own life. There's this reciprocity in Buddhism. The causes you make for others with compassion elevate and give you fortune for those same causes, right? Second, one brings color to one's face. In other words, you will manifest that kindness as with good health. You will manifest physically the effect of that action. And third, one gains strength. Now, strength is a very simple word to say, but there's a lot of charisma behind it as a teaching in Buddhism, because in Asia, or especially ancient Asia, but even today, there's a much stronger association of the word strength to strength of mind and strength of heart-mind. Heart and mind are a pairing in most Asian cultures and thinking. And this is manifested in many other teachings, from Taoism to Confucianism to the I Ching to, many other, from India. The idea of mind-body, although India tends to get very mystical about things and confusing, China was much more grounded historically in its philosophies. So strength, one gains strength. You get strength in mind, greater conviction, greater resolve, right? We talk about that a lot. But also, as the second thing he said, color to one's face, that would be strength of body, health, right? He goes on, to sustain one's own life, end quote, means to be born in the human or heavenly world and receive the karmic reward of long life. One would argue that is from a strength of health, right? When one becomes a Buddha, one manifests oneself as the thus come one of the Dharma body, a body that is as vast as space. And for more on that, see the 3,000 Realms playlist. Because one gains strength, having been born in the human or heavenly world, one becomes a person of virtue and influence, attracting many followers. When one becomes a Buddha, one manifests oneself as the thus come one of the reward body, dwelling on a lotus pedestal where one shines like the full moon in a clear sky on the 15th night of the 8th month. So he's talking about cycles of the moon, so a whole moon, right? This is interesting because we've covered, I've made use of these kind of analogies in several recent videos and older ones about how we influence that word, influence attracting many people. This is just not because you're running out there trying to get followers, but your life condition as you practice, as your practice becomes stronger and more resolute, your environment is affected, right? Because you are your environment. So obviously it follows logically that your environment would respond back. That's what he's describing here. And in our environment are our families, our friends, our neighbors, our community, so on and so forth. And because one, quote, brings color to one's face, end quote, having been born in the human or heavenly world. Now, human or heavenly world, what does he mean there? Because in the West, I have to clarify this. This existence, because of its opportunity to discover Myoho Renge Kyo, because of its opportunity as a human being to transcend this human form and perceive with our Buddha mind, our Buddha wisdom, to achieve Buddha-ness, what else could heaven be? Do you see? To live in the Dharma is to be in heaven. This is the Trishita heaven. See, I have to keep reminding myself and the Sangha, being as we're in the seat of Western thinking, and very nationalist as it is right now, but heaven is not some lofty other place, not some place we can only perceive after we die. It's here and now, just as our enlightenment is here and now. This is Buddha-ness. That's heaven. We're in it. The fact that we sometimes don't know that is samsara. Follow? One acquires the 32 features and becomes as graceful and dignified as a lotus flower. When one becomes a Buddha, one displays oneself as the thus come one of the manifested body and comes to resemble Shakyamuni Buddha. So, the more enlightened you become, the more health, the more bodily health manifests. And so you look healthier, you're happier, you develop that essential self that is the precious life experience that is here all the time. It's just muted or veiled or hidden by attachments and ego and so on and so forth, right? If we inquire into the origin of Mount Sumero, we find that it began with a single speck of dust, and likewise, the great ocean began with a single drop of dew. One added to one becomes two, two becomes three, and so on, to make 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, or an asamkhya. Yet one is the mother of all. As for the beginning of Buddhism, in the country of Japan, after the 7 reigns of the heavenly deities and the 5 reigns of the earthly deities, the 100 reigns of human sovereigns began, the first of whom was called Emperor Jimmu. In the time of Emperor Kimei, the 13th sovereign, following Jimmu, the Buddhist scriptures were introduced to Japan from the kingdom of Pakche, that's Korea, along with a statue of Shakyamuni Buddha, monks, and nuns. Then Prince Jogu, a son of Emperor Yomei, began to study the Buddhist writings. He had a copy of the Lotus Sutra brought from China, wrote a commentary on the text, and endeavored to propagate its teachings. So he was, in our parlance, practicing correctly, right? To read, recite, hold, embrace, copy, spread words right out of the Lotus Sutra. This is the practice described in the Lotus Sutra. Yes, chant Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. I own Myoho Renge Kyo. Right? Use this mandala of Gohonzon, your process of awakening, Gohonzon, your precious identity as a Buddha. Use this as a tool to direct your daimoku, to enliven, to invoke, to exist within your Buddha-ness, your Buddha nature. And tell others. Write it down so it's not lost. The actual sutra. The act of writing stuff down ingrains it in your mind, doesn't it? Using your visual perceptive filters adds to your mental filters of reading, of seeing, of chanting and hearing it, vibrating with it, as many ways as you can commune with your Buddha-ness. Write it down, recite it, copy it, and promulgate it. All tremendous causes toward your Buddha-ness, which, again, is part of your environment, so influencing your environment. But more than that, do it physically. Write it down, share it with others. Or in our day, copy it. Disseminate it. This is why I have Gohonzons available, or the mandalas of Gohonzons available online. It costs for the paper and the printing and so forth, so there has to be a little bit of money dispensed, but not because you have to be a member in order to get benefit or to even receive Gohonzon. The mandala of Gohonzon is available. It's free, just as your Buddhahood is. Nobody controls that except you. It's yours to develop. So why not have the tool be as easily available as possible? You know, no tripwires, no conditions. Just have it and work. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. But the first cause you can make is to get yourself set up with an altar and have the mandala to awaken you. Every time you see it, your Buddha-ness pays attention. You going to do it? Later, he continues, in the time of Emperor Kotoku, the 37th sovereign, the administrator of monks, Kanroku, introduced the 3 treatises and establishment of truth schools from the kingdom of Silla to Japan. During the same period, a monk named Dosho introduced the Dharma characteristics and the Dharma analysis treasure schools from China, and the preceptor Shinjo introduced the flower garland school. Now, These are all part of the scholarship of Buddhism. So, as I said earlier, to study earlier teachings only serves to deepen your pool of wisdom to once again manifest and realize Myoho Renge-kyo, the Lotus Sutra, as the culminating teaching. Unfortunately, what happened, as influential as these other sutras were, those people studied those sutras, promulgated them as the teaching, superseding the others in some, and then they had to start developing ways of convincing people that they were number one. It gets very political. This is the avarice of human nature, right? And that's unfortunate because it created, where it should have created deeper insights, it created confusion and competitiveness. Humans, right? So he goes on. In the reign of Empress Gensho, the 44th sovereign, an honorable monk from India introduced the Mahabharachana Sutra. And in the time of Emperor Shomu, the 45th sovereign, the Reverend Ganjin came from China, introducing the Precepts School to Japan. At the same time, he brought with him copies of the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra and the words and phrases commentary on the Lotus Sutra from Tendai, I believe. Great concentration and insight, a seminal Tendai teaching. Commentaries on the Vimalakirti Sutra and other works of the Tendai school. There you are. But he did not propagate the teachings of the true word and Tendai Lotus schools. In the reign of Emperor Kamu, the 50th sovereign, there was a young monk named Saicho, who was later to be known as the great teacher Dengyo. Before going to Tang's China, he spent 15 years studying on his own the writings and commentaries of the True Word and Tendai schools. Later, in the 7th month of the 23rd year of the Enraku era, 804, he sailed for China. He returned to Japan in the 6th month of the following year, and thereafter instructed several dozen learned monks of the 7 major temples of Nara in the teachings of the Tendai and True Word schools. 400 years have passed since then. In all, it has been more than 700 years since Buddhism was first introduced to Japan. During that time, there have been persons who urged the populace to call upon the name of Amida Buddha, right? One of the emanations of Shakyamuni, not an actual person. That's the Nembutsu practice. To call upon the name of Mahabharachana, or to invoke the name of Shakyamuni. But there has never been anyone who urged them to chant Namu Myoho Renge-kyo, the Daimoku, or title of the Lotus Sutra. This does not apply to Japan alone. In India, in the 1,000 years following the passing of the Buddha, there were great scholars such as Mahakashyapa, Ananda, Ashvagosha, Nagarjuna, Asanga, and Vasubandhu, who worked to propagate Buddhism throughout the 5 regions of India. And in the first several hundred years after Buddhism was introduced to China, people such as Kashyapa Matanga, Chu Falan, the Tripitaka master Kumarajiva, Nanhui, Tendai, and Miao Lo wrote commentaries and expounded the teachings of the sutras. But none of these persons ever urged that the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra be chanted in the same manner as the name of Amida. Although it was known, it wasn't urged as practice. They only chanted it themselves, or when lecturing on the Lotus Sutra, the lecturer himself alone recited it. The teachings of the 8 schools and the 9 schools differ from one another, yet generally speaking, we find that in the majority of cases, The founders and leaders of these schools recited the name of Amida. Next in number were those who recited the name of Perceiver of the World Sounds, and next those who invoked the name of Shakyamuni Buddha, followed by those who called upon the name Mahavarachana, Medicine Master, or others. But for some reason, there were none who chanted the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, the heart and core of the Buddha's entire lifetime of teachings. You should inquire very carefully into the reason why this was so. A skilled physician, for example, may discern the causes of all kinds of illnesses, as well as the relative efficacy of various medications, but nevertheless refrains from indiscriminately applying the most powerful medicine and instead employs other medicines depending on the nature of the illness. Thus, perhaps it was because, during the 2,000 years of the former and middle days of the law following the Buddha's passing, the sickness of delusion had not yet become critical, and therefore no one urged that the 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo, the finest medicine in all the Buddha's lifetime of teachings, be applied. But now we have entered the latter day of the law, and people are all suffering from grave illness, our mind, our life condition. This illness can hardly be cured by such minor medicines as invocations to Amida, Mahavarachana, or Shakyamuni. Though the moon is beautiful, the full splendor of its light can only be seen in autumn. Though the cherry blossoms are lovely, they open only in spring. All these things depend on the time. Since that is so, may we not suppose that during the 2,000 years of the former and middle days of the law, the time had not yet come for the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra to spread. Again, it is the Buddha's messengers who propagate this teaching. These disciples of the Buddha have different doctrines that they received from him. Thus, the scholars who appeared during the 1,000 years of the former day of the law and the teachers who appeared during the 1,000 years of the middle day of the law were in most cases persons who had been entrusted with Hinayana or provisional Mahayana doctrines, or with the theoretical teachings of the Lotus Sutra or other ancillary doctrines. Bodhisattva superior practices, who is entrusted with the Daimoku, the core of the essential teaching, had not yet appeared in the world. Where are we time-wise? Okay. But now he will appear in the latter day of the law and propagate the 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo to all the nations and people throughout Jampudvipa. Surely it will spread just as the invocation of Amida's name has spread throughout Japan at the present time. I, Nichiren, am not the founder of any school, nor am I a latter-day follower of any older school. I am a monk without precepts, neither keeping the precepts nor breaking them. I am an ordinary creature like an ox or a sheep, who is neither particularly wise nor ignorant. Why did I first begin to chant as I do? Bodhisattva's superior practices is the one destined to make his advent in this world, to propagate the 5 characters of Myoho Renge Kyo. But before he had even appeared, I began, as though speaking in a dream, hardly aware of what I was doing, to utter the words Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, and so I chant them now. In the end, is this a good thing I do, or a bad thing? I do not know, nor can anyone else tell for certain. But when I open the Lotus Sutra and reverently peruse it, I see that even the Bodhisattvas Manjushri, Maitreya, perceiver of the world's sounds, and universal worthy, who had reached the stage of near perfect enlightenment, were scarcely able to uphold so much as a single phrase or verse of this sutra, because the sutra itself states that it can only be understood and shared between Buddhas. The Flower Garland Sutra represents the first exposition of the sudden teachings preached immediately following the Buddha's enlightenment. It is a sutra that embodies the complete and perfect teaching. Yet, it was entrusted to 4 bodhisattvas, including Dharma wisdom, to expound. The Wisdom Sutras, though not on the same level as the Flower Garland Sutra, nevertheless represent the loftiest among the other sutras that the Buddha had preached thus far, and yet Subhuti was the one entrusted with the task of expounding them. So that task, just so I remind you, is daily recitation, repeated recitations, all day long, because they were going to be responsible for the memorization, word for word, inflection for inflection, perfect copying. They didn't have copy machines, right? The copy machines of those days were the memory and articulation of the monks. This is why it took so long to translate them all initially, because they were all oral teachings. So your responsibility for your life as a monk is to retain this sermon and memorize it, repeat it, chant it out loud several times a day until it just became like breathing, word for word. So that's what that means, entrustment with the task of expounding them, not interpreting them. Only the Lotus Sutra represents the wonderful teachings preached directly from the golden mouth of Shakyamuni Buddha, who is perfectly endowed with the 3 bodies. Therefore, even Universal Worthy and Manjushri were hardly able to expound so much as a single phrase or verse of it. How much more difficult, then, must it be for us, who are no more than ordinary people living in this latter age, to embrace even 1 or 2 words of this sutra? Because the founders of the various schools read the Lotus Sutra, their respective disciples all assumed that their own teacher had grasped the sutra's heart. However, if we look carefully into the essence of the matter, we find that the great teacher Tsuen read the Lotus Sutra while making the Profound Secret Sutra and the Treatise on the Consciousness-Only Doctrine his teachers. And the great teacher Chiai Sheng read the Lotus Sutra while making the Wisdom Sutras and the Treatise on the Middle Way his teachers. Men like Tu Shun and Fat Sang read the Lotus Sutra while making the Flower Garland Sutra and the commentary on the 10 Stages Sutra their teachers. And Shanmu Wei, Qing Kang Shi, and Pu Kung read the Lotus Sutra while making the Mahavarachana Sutra their teacher. All these men thought that they had read the Lotus Sutra, but in fact, they had not read so much as a single phrase or verse of it. They did not understand it. In the end, it was the great teacher Dengyo. It is as the great teacher Dengyo meant when he said, quote, though he praises the Lotus Sutra, he destroys its heart, end quote. They were like non-Buddhist believers who, though they read the Buddhist sutras, interpreted them to be the same as non-Buddhist teachings, or like bats that, in their blindness, mistake day for night. Or they were like a red-faced man who, looking into a clear mirror, supposes that the whole mirror has turned red. Or like a round-faced man who, seeing his reflection in a narrow sword blade, thinks that his face has become long and thin. But I'm different from such persons. I firmly uphold the teaching that the Lotus Sutra is supreme among the sutras that the Buddha has preached, now preaches and will ever preach. Moreover, I chant the Daimoku, which is the heart and core of the entire sutra. As you know, it's the title of the sutra, but it's also the title that's repeated before the name of each and every chapter. It's like really pushing Myoho Renge Kyo. This is it. and I urge others to do likewise. Although the mugwort growing in the hemp field, or wood marked for a cutting with a inked line, may not be straight to begin with, they will, as a matter of course, become so. In the same way, one who chants Daimoku as the Lotus Sutra teaches will never have a twisted mind. For one who should know that, unless the mind of the Buddha enters into our bodies, we cannot, in fact, chant the Daimoku. Interesting. So Buddha-ness, Buddhahood, is innate. But until we chant the Daimoku and invoke that innate Buddha-ness, that Buddha nature, that Buddha mind, it lies dormant beneath all of our delusions of samsara. He's saying it very clearly right there, right? And I think on that note, I'm going to pause. This is a very interesting sutra, isn't it? It does a lot to clarify Nichiren's place and the Daimoku's place in the entirety of Buddhist teachings. So, we will continue in part 2. And there's quite a bit. We'll probably have about 3 parts to this one. I don't know. We might complete it in the next one. Until then, I leave you with quite a lot of information here. Has a lot to do with study, has a lot to do with how Nichiren sees his place in the history of Buddhism. Always a very humble man, but very, very deep in resolve and conviction that after his entire life of study, the Lotus Sutra is the essence of Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings, therefore the essence of Buddhism itself. The most expedient way to awaken your Buddha-ness. So stay strong, even when times are tough, as all the more reason to focus on Daimoku, study. Daimoku is very powerful, but study makes it far more profound. It really penetrates every cell of your body, your life. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you so much for being here. If you have a very busy life, like most of us do, and it's easier for you to listen to these videos, know that anywhere you get podcasts, that you can download and listen anytime that's more convenient for you when you can focus on it. I have a podcast. Basically, it's the audio track of all these videos, so you won't miss a thing, except my odd expressions. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, the Buddhahood podcast. 3 words, the Buddhahood podcast. All right, and those of you, I've received a lot of donations lately that come from random, just singular donations through PayPal at paypal.me/Sifu Sylvain, I believe. And I deeply appreciate those random influxes of support. They're very, very meaningful. They keep this going. And those of you who have committed on Patreon for regular donations, wow, I can't even express the gratitude for myself and the Sangha. Deeply appreciate you. Some of you are in the credits forward and backward. Front and end of the video. And with that, I will leave you until part 2. Take care of yourselves. Keep your practice strong. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Take care.